Hello everyone. Welcome to podcast, where is explored in a whole new way. Join me as we dive into the exciting world of pod, where each video brings knowledge and unforgettable experiences. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss anything new. Now, let's get started. Jack Wilson stood at the bedroom doorway, quietly observing his wife, Megan Packer, as she packed her suitcase for a business trip to Chicago. The soft clinking of hangers, the gentle rustling of clothes, and Megan's measured movements filled the room. Jack, a high school physics teacher, leaned against the frame, admiring her graceful demeanor. After 10 years of marriage, he still found her beautiful, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders as she focused intently on her task. "Got everything you need?" he asked casually, though his eyes lingered on the sleek black lingerie Megan had just folded and placed into her bag. Megan smiled without looking up. "Just about. This conference has a packed schedule. I'll need to look my best for some of the after-hours events." Jack nodded, trying to shake the vague unease that had settled in his chest. Her attention to detail for this trip was unusual, too careful. Megan always prided herself on being efficient, but this time, there was an extra level of preparation, a sense of anticipation that hadn't been there before. The lingerie, the extra time she spent on her appearance, it all gnawed at him. As she zipped up the suitcase and placed it by the door, Megan turned to him with a bright smile. "I'll be back in a few days. Don't work too hard while I'm gone, okay?" Jack chuckled, trying to mask the discomfort swirling inside. "I'll try, but you know how it is with grading papers." Megan kissed him lightly on the cheek, grabbing her purse before heading out the door. "I'll text you when I get to the hotel. Love you." "Love you too," Jack replied, but the words felt hollow as the front door closed behind her. The house suddenly felt too quiet, the usual hum of their life together absent. Jack sat down on the edge of their bed, staring at the neatly packed suitcase Megan had left behind. Something felt off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Later that evening, after cleaning up dinner and attempting to lose himself in a stack of student essays, Jack's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at the screen, expecting it to be Megan, but instead, it was an unknown number. "Your wife isn't who she says she is. Check the guest list at the hotel she's staying at in Chicago. You'll see for yourself." Jack's heart pounded as he read the message over and over, a sense of dread creeping into his veins. Who would send him something like this? He tried to dismiss it as a cruel joke, but the words lingered, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. He tossed his phone onto the couch, rubbing his temples. This was ridiculous. Megan was at a conference, she'd never give him a reason to doubt her before. But the nagging feeling wouldn't let go. With a heavy sigh, Jack picked up his laptop and searched for the hotel where Megan claimed she was staying. As he scanned the guest list for the conference, his stomach churned, her name wasn't there. His pulse quickened. Was the text message right? He scrolled through the website, searching for any sign of her, but there was nothing. Then, as if on autopilot, he opened their shared calendar, and there it was, an entry he hadn't noticed before, A&M Special Project. It was scheduled for the same dates as her so-called conference. Jack frowned, staring at the calendar in disbelief. Megan hadn't mentioned anything about a special project, and the initials caught his attention. A&M. Megan had been working closely with Adam Reeves, a new teacher at the school, for months. Jack had always thought their relationship was professional, but now, every late night, every new outfit Megan bought for work, every extra hour she spent at school seemed to take on a new, darker meaning. He closed the laptop, his mind racing. Could she really be having an affair? The thought twisted his stomach, making him feel sick. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was piling up, piece by piece. Unable to ignore the gnawing doubt, Jack rummaged through Megan's things, searching for anything that might confirm his suspicions. His hands trembled as he opened her nightstand drawer, and there it was, a note tucked beneath her jewelry box. The words on the paper felt like a punch to the gut. "Can't wait for our time together. Hey, Adam." Jack sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of betrayal crashing down on him. His hands shook as he clutched the note, disbelief clouding his thoughts. How had he not seen this coming? How long had she been lying to him? The world seemed to tilt, the familiar comfort of their home now a prison of deceit. He needed to know the truth. And he needed to act. With a surge of determination, Jack grabbed his phone and dialed Sarah, a former student who had become a close friend over the years. Sarah worked as a private investigator, and if anyone could help him get answers, it was her. When Sarah picked up, Jack's voice trembled with anger and hurt as he explained the situation. Sarah listened carefully, her tone serious when she spoke. Jack, I've had my suspicions about Megan for a while, but I wasn't sure enough to say anything. Let me help you. We'll find out exactly where she is. Jack agreed, his resolve hardening with every word. He couldn't sit idly by while his wife betrayed him. He needed to see this through, no matter how much it hurt. Together, they would get the answers he so desperately needed. The betrayal that had been simmering beneath the surface was about to explode, and Jack was ready to confront it head-on. Jack sat in the dimly lit living room, his eyes fixated on the glowing screen of his phone. The anonymous text message was still there, its words bold and unshakable in his mind. Your wife isn't who she says she is. Check the guest list at the hotel she's staying at in Chicago. You'll see for yourself. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about it since it arrived. The idea that Megan, his wife of 10 years, was lying to him had gnawed at his thoughts, each passing hour adding to the weight of suspicion. For the past few minutes, Jack had stared at the message, hoping the feeling of dread would disappear. But it didn't. He kept telling himself that Megan had always been honest, always loyal. They'd built a life together, shared dreams and moments that felt too strong to break. Yet the message lingered like an ominous cloud. What if it wasn't just a cruel prank? Trying to push the thought away, he picked up his laptop, opening the browser to check the guest list at the hotel Megan said she was staying at. It seemed ridiculous, intrusive even, but his hand moved almost on its own. Searching for her name on the hotel's conference list felt wrong, like he was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Still, he typed it out. The screen loaded, showing the conference attendees. His heart raced as he scrolled, looking for her name among the list of guests. Nothing. There was no Megan Packer listed for the conference. Jack's pulse quickened as a pit formed in his stomach. He stared at the screen, hoping it was a mistake. Maybe the list wasn't updated, or perhaps she had registered under a different name for some reason. He refreshed the page and looked again, but the result was the same, Megan wasn't there. A cold chill ran through him. The words from the anonymous text echoed in his mind. Could it be true? Could Megan really be hiding something from him? Trying to steady himself, Jack opened their shared calendar, searching for some clue that would confirm Megan's conference plans. His eyes skimmed over the usual entries, dinner with friends, work meetings, until he spotted something unfamiliar, an entry marked A&M special project. It was scheduled for the same dates as Megan's supposed conference. Jack's heart dropped. He'd never heard her mention this A&M special project before. His mind raced to make sense of it. He knew she'd been working closely with Adam Reeves, the new teacher at their school. Adam had been involved in a lot of the extracurricular projects recently. A&M, Adam and Megan? Was it possible? Images of the last few months flooded his mind, the late nights Megan spent at school, the new clothes she'd bought, the way she seemed more distant, distracted even. It all felt different now, every moment twisting into something sinister. The invisible line between normalcy and betrayal had blurred in an instant. Feeling a mix of disbelief and anger, Jack stood up, pacing around the living room. His thoughts were swirling. Was he being paranoid? Was this all some misunderstanding? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was piling up too quickly to ignore. His hands clenched into fists as he replayed every conversation, every late night Megan spent working, and every unexplained moment in his mind. The seed of doubt that had been planted by the text had now taken root, growing into a full-fledged fear that he could no longer push aside. Just as Jack began considering confronting Megan, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number, she's with Adam. Look closer, and you'll find the truth. Jack's body tensed. Adam. Of course, it had to be Adam. Everything suddenly made sense, and his mind began to connect the dots. Their shared glances at work, the long hours, the friendly banter that seemed just a little too familiar, how had he not seen it before? His throat tightened with a sense of betrayal as he sank back into the couch. He wasn't ready to confront her yet. He needed more than suspicion. He needed to know for sure, no matter how painful the truth might be. Without wasting another second, Jack picked up his phone and called Sarah, his former student and now a close friend. Sarah had gone on to become a private investigator, and if anyone could help him find out the truth, it was her. Jack's voice trembled as he explained the situation, and Sarah listened intently on the other end. Jack, I'm sorry you're going through this, Sarah said softly. I've had my suspicions about Megan for a while, but I wasn't sure enough to say anything. Let me help you get to the bottom of this. We'll find out if she's really with Adam. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat, his mind still reeling. I don't want to believe it, Sarah. I don't. But I need to know. Then we'll find out, Sarah said firmly. I'll trace her phone's location and see where she really is. Jack's hands trembled as he hung up the phone. His mind was spinning, but now, there was no turning back. He had to know the truth, even if it shattered everything he believed about his marriage. The calm facade of their life was about to break, and Jack braced himself for what was coming. The next day, Jack sat at the kitchen table, his breakfast untouched, staring at his phone. Sarah had promised to check Megan's location later that afternoon. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled deep in his chest. Every sound in the house felt amplified in the oppressive silence that seemed to follow Megan's departure. Jack's thoughts drifted back to the calendar entry that had caused everything to unravel, A&M special project. It seemed innocent enough, but now, the initials taunted him, constantly reminding him of Adam and Megan's potential betrayal. Jack wondered how long this had been going on. Were there other signs he had missed? His mind raced through all the little moments, the unexplained late nights, the occasional forgotten details about her day. It all seemed to fall into place now. The morning dragged on. Jack tried to distract himself by working through his grading, but every time his mind wandered, it circled back to Megan. Was she really in Chicago with Adam? Was she lying to him? The thought made his stomach churn with a mix of anger and despair. As noon approached, his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Jack answered immediately, his voice tense. Did you find anything? Jack, I tracked her phone, Sarah said, her voice calm but serious. She's not at the hotel she said she'd be at for the conference. She's at a luxury resort outside the city. It's the same place Adam posted about on social media a few weeks ago. The confirmation hit Jack like a punch to the gut. He had hoped, somehow, that he was wrong, that this was all just some mistake. But hearing Sarah say it aloud made it real. Megan was with Adam. She had lied to him, and now there was no denying it. Thanks, Sarah, Jack muttered, his voice hoarse. He ended the call and stared blankly at the table in front of him, his mind racing. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in on him, the air thick with betrayal. Jack pushed himself away from the table, pacing the kitchen as anger bubbled up inside him. How could she do this? After everything they had been through together, how could she throw it all away for some cheap affair? He clenched his fists, trying to contain the rage that threatened to spill over. His mind spun in 1,000 directions, the pain of her deceit clouding every rational thought. He couldn't sit still any longer. Jack grabbed his coat and keys, needing to clear his head. He drove aimlessly through town, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, but no matter where he went, he couldn't escape the thoughts tearing at him. The woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew, had betrayed him. The image of Megan with Adam gnawed at his mind, relentless and cruel. By the time he returned home, the sun was beginning to set. Jack sank back into the couch, exhausted, his body heavy with the weight of what he had learned. The house felt cold and empty, a reflection of the growing distance between him and Megan. He hadn't heard from her all day. Normally, she would have texted by now to check in, but her silence only confirmed what he already knew: she was with Adam, and she didn't care enough to hide it anymore. As night fell, Jack's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another calendar notification: A&M special project for the following day. He stared at the notification in disbelief. The audacity of it all stunned him. She was carrying on her affair, planning it right under his nose. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't just let this happen. He couldn't sit by while Megan continued to lie to him, while she and Adam carried on as if he didn't matter. He needed to do something, to take back control. His fingers tightened around his phone as he made a decision: he was going to confront them. He called Sarah again, this time with a plan in mind. "I need you to help me get into that resort," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I need to see this for myself. I need to confront them." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll book us a room under my name. We'll go together, and you'll get the answers you need." The plan was set. Tomorrow, they would go to the resort. Jack would face Megan and Adam, and he would force them to admit their betrayal. His heart raced with a mix of fear and anger. He didn't know how Megan would react, or what Adam would say, but he knew he couldn't live in the shadow of this lie any longer. The hours passed slowly that night. Jack lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind too restless to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, images of Megan and Adam together flashed in his mind: their laughter, their shared moments, all behind his back. The betrayal cut deeper with every thought, until the anger inside him was almost unbearable. When the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Jack rose, feeling a sense of grim determination. Today, he would confront them. Today, the truth would finally come out, and he would no longer be the fool in the dark. The next morning, Jack woke up feeling the weight of what he was about to do. The sleepless night had only intensified his anger and frustration. The plan to confront Megan and Adam was set, and he could feel the gravity of it in every step he took around the house. As he stood in the kitchen, sipping his coffee, he stared out the window, trying to steady his nerves. His mind was a storm of emotions: betrayal, hurt, and rage swirling together, making it hard to think clearly. He checked his phone. A message from Sarah popped up: "Rooms booked. I'll pick you up in an hour." Jack took a deep breath, placing the mug down on the counter. The decision to go to the resort, to see the betrayal with his own eyes, had been made. There was no turning back now. He glanced around the house, his eyes resting on the framed photos of him and Megan scattered throughout the living room. Smiling faces, happy moments captured in time. Those moments felt like distant memories, tainted by the lies she had been living. When Sarah arrived, Jack barely spoke as he climbed into the car. The drive to the resort was filled with tension, an unspoken understanding hanging in the air between them. Sarah had always been good at reading him, and this time was no different. She knew he needed silence, space to process what he was about to face. As they approached the resort, the luxurious facade felt like a mockery of everything Jack was feeling inside. It was an expensive place, the kind Megan would have loved. But now, it just stood as a symbol of the deceit she had woven into their lives. His hands gripped the seat as they pulled into the parking lot, his heart pounding as the enormity of what he was about to do hit him. Sarah parked the car and turned to him. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure if anyone could be truly ready for something like this. "Let's do it." They walked through the grand entrance of the resort, passing smiling guests and hotel staff. Jack couldn't help but feel like he was walking through some distorted version of reality, everyone around him blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in his life. His stomach twisted as they approached the front desk. Sarah stepped up first, using her investigative skills to avoid any suspicion. "We have a reservation under Sarah Lawson," she said smoothly, handing over the fake ID she used for cases like this. The clerk smiled and handed her 2 room keys. "Welcome to our resort. Your room is ready." Jack barely registered the exchange as they headed toward the elevators. His mind was fixed on one thing, seeing Megan and Adam, confirming the affair that had torn his life apart. His heart raced with every step they took down the hallway, closer to the room where his wife was undoubtedly with another man. They reached the door to their suite, directly across from the one Sarah had confirmed Megan and Adam were staying in. Jack's hands trembled as he swiped the key card, and they stepped inside. The room was luxurious, with plush carpets and a breathtaking view, but Jack barely noticed any of it. His mind was elsewhere, on the door just a few feet away. Sarah sat down at the small table near the window, her expression serious. "Do you want to wait and catch them coming out, or do you want to go in now?" Jack couldn't decide. Part of him wanted to burst in, to confront them without warning and see their faces when they realized the game was up. But another part of him wanted to wait, to watch from a distance, to be sure before he acted. "I'll wait," he finally said, his voice hoarse. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Every sound in the hallway, every creak of the building made Jack jump, his heart hammering in his chest. His mind raced through the confrontation he was about to have, playing out the scene over and over. What would Megan say? Would she deny it? Would Adam even try to defend himself? Jack didn't know, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Then, there was a sound, a door opening down the hall. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he peeked through the small gap in their door. His worst fear was confirmed when he saw Megan step out of the room, followed by Adam. They were laughing, their bodies close, the kind of closeness that had once been reserved for him and Megan. The sight hit Jack like a ton of bricks. His vision blurred for a moment, the raw betrayal overwhelming him. He clenched his fists, feeling the anger rise in him like a wave. This was it. This was the moment he had dreaded and needed in equal measure. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Are you ready now?" Jack nodded, his jaw tight. "Let's go." They stepped out into the hallway, and as Jack approached Megan and Adam, his heart pounded in his ears. Megan's eyes widened when she saw him, her smile fading into shock. Adam looked equally stunned, his expression quickly shifting to something like guilt. "Jack," Megan started, but Jack cut her off. "Save it," he said, his voice cold, controlled. "I know everything." The color drained from Megan's face as the reality of the situation set in. Jack's heart felt heavy, but there was no turning back now. He had made his decision, and the truth was out in the open. The hallway outside the suite felt suffocating, the air thick with tension as Jack stood face to face with Megan and Adam. The silence was deafening, only broken by the faint hum of the resort's background music filtering through the walls. Megan's eyes darted from Jack to Adam, her face pale with shock and a mix of emotions Jack couldn't read. "Jack, what are you doing here?" Megan stammered, trying to compose herself, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Jack stared at her, his chest tight with the weight of everything he had been holding inside. "What am I doing here?" he repeated slowly, his voice low and controlled, but his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" Adam shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands tucked nervously into his pockets. Jack's gaze flicked toward him, his body tense, as if daring him to speak. Adam, clearly uncomfortable under Jack's icy stare, opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He glanced at Megan, silently pleading for her to take control of the situation. Megan took a deep breath, trying to recover, but the panic in her eyes was unmistakable. "Jack, this isn't what it looks like," she said, her voice shaky. "I can explain." Jack laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet hallway. "It's not what it looks like," he repeated. "Megan, I've seen everything I need to see. I know about the lies, the affair, all of it." Megan's face crumpled as she realized there was no use in denying it any longer. The weight of her deception hung between them like a dense fog. She glanced at Adam again, searching for support, but he remained silent, looking at the floor. Jack stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with fury. "You've been sneaking around with him behind my back. You lied to me, to my face. And for what? For this? He gestured toward Adam, the man who had quietly betrayed him as well. Jack, Megan started, but Jack cut her off, his voice rising with the pain and anger he had been holding back for so long. How long, Megan? How long have you been lying to me? How long has this been going on? Megan opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, Jack saw a flicker of the woman he had once loved so deeply. But it wasn't enough to quell the rage building inside him. I trusted you. Jack's voice cracked as he spoke, the betrayal hitting him all over again. I loved you, and this is what you do? You throw it all away for him? He jabbed a finger toward Adam, who flinched but still didn't speak. Megan finally broke down, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Jack. I never meant for it to happen like this. You didn't mean for it to happen? Jack interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You didn't mean to lie to my face every day? You didn't mean to sneak off to some luxury resort while pretending you were at a conference? Megan sobbed, her hands covering her face, but Jack wasn't done. The flood of emotions he had been bottling up was pouring out now, and he couldn't stop it. Adam finally spoke, his voice shaky. Jack, I'm sorry, man. I didn't. Don't, Jack snapped, turning to face him. Don't even try. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew she was my wife, and you did it anyway. Adam looked down, guilt written all over his face, but Jack didn't care. The anger coursing through him was too strong to be appeased by a few weak apologies. You both lied to me, Jack continued, his voice quieter now, the anger giving way to a deep, bone-crushing sadness. You both made me a fool. Megan stepped forward, her eyes pleading. Jack, please, But Jack stepped back, shaking his head. No, Megan. It's too late. It's far too late for apologies. For a long moment, there was only silence. The three of them stood there, frozen in the hallway of a luxurious resort that now felt like the coldest place on earth. Jack's heart ached, the weight of the betrayal crushing him from all sides. He had come here for answers, for a confrontation, but now that it was happening, the reality of it all was unbearable. Megan wiped her eyes, her face streaked with tears. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, Jack replied, his voice hollow. It's over. Whatever we had, it's over. He turned and walked away, his steps heavy with the burden of what had just happened. Sarah was waiting in the room across the hall, but Jack didn't care about the plan anymore. He needed to leave, to get out of this place, to escape the suffocating reality of his broken marriage. As he stepped outside, the cold air hit him, but it did little to numb the pain inside. Jack stood there for a moment, staring up at the sky, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The life he had known, the trust he had built with Megan, was shattered, and he didn't know if it could ever be repaired. One thing was certain, though, there was no going back. Jack sat alone in his car, staring blankly through the windshield. The cold night air seeped through the cracked window, but he barely noticed. The confrontation at the resort had left him feeling numb, hollow, as if everything he had known about his life had been pulled out from under him. He had left Megan and Adam behind without looking back, but the weight of their betrayal still clung to him, heavy and oppressive. For a moment, he thought about turning around, going back to the hotel to say more, maybe demand an explanation or hear more of their pathetic apologies. But what was the point? There was nothing left to say. Megan's tearful confessions and Adam's guilty silence had already told him everything he needed to know. He had spent so many years building a life with her, trusting her, believing in the love they had shared. Now, it was all in ruins, destroyed in the span of a few hours. The realization that it was over, really over, settled over him like a suffocating blanket. There was no way to salvage this, no possibility of pretending things could go back to how they were. Jack exhaled deeply, his breath fogging the window. He didn't know what to feel, anger, sadness, betrayal, they all swirled together, leaving him lost in a sea of emotions. How was he supposed to move on from this? What did his future look like now, without Megan? The drive back home was a blur. Jack wasn't even sure how he had managed to get there, his mind too preoccupied with the memories that kept flashing through his mind. The house was dark when he arrived, the same house they had built their lives in. Now, it felt unfamiliar, like a shell of what it once was. Everything inside reminded him of her, her favorite chair, the pictures on the walls, the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. He stood in the living room, staring at a framed photo of the two of them from their last vacation. They had been smiling, arms wrapped around each other, the happiness in their eyes so clear and real. It felt like a different lifetime, a different couple. Jack couldn't reconcile the woman in that picture with the woman he had confronted at the resort just hours earlier. He picked up the photo, studying it for a long moment, before placing it face down on the table. He couldn't look at it anymore. It hurt too much. The following days were a blur of anger and sadness, emotions hitting him in waves, one after the other. Megan had called several times, leaving tearful messages that he couldn't bear to listen to. Apologies, explanations, it didn't matter. Nothing she said could undo what she had done. Jack ignored her calls, each one only serving to remind him of the betrayal, the lies. He knew he needed to face her eventually, to talk about what came next, divorce, separation, whatever, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. He also avoided his colleagues at work. The thought of facing Adam every day in the hallways of the school was unbearable. Everyone would find out eventually. Affairs like this didn't stay quiet for long, and the humiliation of being the betrayed husband would follow him, a shadow he couldn't escape. Jack spent most of his time holed up in the house, trying to figure out what to do with his life now. His marriage was over, but what came next? Could he ever trust anyone again? Could he even trust himself? He had been so blind, so willing to believe in the life they had built. How had he missed all the signs? One afternoon, as Jack sat by the window, watching the rain drizzle down, he made a decision. He couldn't stay here any longer. This house, this town, it was all too full of memories, too full of Megan. Every corner he turned, every familiar face he passed would be a reminder of what had been and what was lost. He needed to leave, to start fresh somewhere else, away from the ruins of his past. The next morning, Jack packed his things. He didn't take much, just the essentials. He left the photo albums, the keepsakes, everything that had once mattered to them. It was all meaningless now. As he closed the suitcase, he felt a strange sense of relief, like a burden had been lifted. This was the first step toward reclaiming his life, toward moving forward. Before he left, he sat down at the kitchen table and wrote Megan a letter. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but he needed to say goodbye, to have closure. The words came slowly at first, but once he started, they poured out. He told her he forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because he needed to let go. He wished her well, even if their paths never crossed again. When he finished, he placed the letter on the counter, grabbed his suitcase, and walked out the door. As he drove away, the house faded into the distance, and with it, the life he had once known. Jack didn't know where he was going, but for the first time in days, he felt like he was finally moving forward. A week later, Jack sat quietly in the back of the school board meeting, his hands clasped together as the members of the board deliberated. The room was filled with tense murmurs, and Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The fallout from the resort confrontation had spread quickly, as he had expected. Gossip moved fast in a small community, and it wasn't long before everyone knew about Megan's affair with Adam. It had become the talk of the school, and now, the board had called an emergency meeting to address the scandal. Jack had been dreading this day, but he knew it was inevitable. Megan and Adam were facing disciplinary action, and the board was deliberating whether to fire them both. Jack, on the other hand, was there to clear his own name. Even though he wasn't directly involved in the affair, the gossip and whispers had touched him too. People questioned whether he had known, whether he had covered for Megan. The rumors had a life of their own, and Jack needed to put an end to them. The door to the meeting room creaked open, and the board members returned to their seats. Jack's heart raced as the chairperson, Mr. Coleman, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We've reviewed the situation in its entirety," Mr. Coleman began, glancing around at the room. "This is a serious matter that has impacted not only the individuals involved but the entire school community." Jack sat up straighter, his eyes fixed on Mr. Coleman. His palms were sweaty, and he felt the knot of tension in his stomach tightening. "Megan Packer and Adam Reeves have both violated the ethical standards of our school," Mr. Coleman continued. "Their actions have caused a disruption, and we cannot overlook the damage done to the school's reputation. Therefore, the board has decided that both Megan and Adam will be placed on administrative leave, pending further review. Termination is likely, but we will allow them to present their case before final decisions are made." A murmur ran through the room, and Jack felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Megan's career, like their marriage, was in ruins. Adam's fate was no better. He could only imagine how things would unravel for both of them in the coming weeks. Mr. Coleman's voice cut through Jack's thoughts. "As for Mr. Wilson," he said, turning toward Jack, "we have found no evidence of any wrongdoing on his part. He was not aware of the affair and played no role in the events that transpired. We believe Mr. Wilson has handled the situation with dignity, and the board sees no reason to take any action against him." Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The words "handled with dignity" echoed in his mind. In the midst of all the chaos and betrayal, at least his professional reputation had remained intact. The meeting adjourned, and as people began to file out, Jack remained seated for a moment, absorbing the news. He had been cleared of any suspicion, but the reality of his life was still painful. Megan and Adam were out of the picture, and soon the school would move on from the scandal. But Jack knew that moving on wasn't going to be that simple for him. Later that evening, Jack returned to his now half-empty house. The rooms were quiet, filled only with the echoes of memories that once defined his life. Megan hadn't come back, and Jack hadn't reached out. Their marriage, broken beyond repair, was over. She would likely face her own reckoning, both professionally and personally. The fallout from their affair wasn't just confined to the school. The entire community had turned against them, and Jack knew Megan's road to redemption would be long and difficult, if it ever came at all. Jack walked through the house, the familiar feeling of loneliness settling in. But tonight, it felt different, less oppressive, more like a blank slate than a prison. He had made a decision to leave town, to start fresh somewhere new, and now, the path was clear. The school board's decision had given him the freedom he needed, the final closure to step away from the wreckage of his old life. Before he left, Jack sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a small notebook. He had been writing down his thoughts every day since the confrontation, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. It had helped him process the betrayal, the hurt, and the anger. Now, as he sat there, he realized he was ready to write something new. He penned a letter, not to Megan this time, but to himself. A reminder of what he had survived, a promise that he would rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. The words flowed more easily now, the bitterness and resentment fading as he wrote about the future he would create for himself. When the letter was done, Jack folded it and placed it in his bag. He stood up, glancing around the house one last time, and smiled, just a small, fleeting smile, but it was enough. He grabbed his keys and suitcase, walking out the door and into the cool night air. The sky above him was clear, the stars bright and unburdened. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jack felt the weight on his shoulders lift. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he knew one thing for sure: it was time to begin again.